Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclaim Leader. Jesse, it's good to see you, man. We always ask about the weather because I am just genuinely curious about life in the Pacific Northwest. We in the Northeast, it is fall. It feels like fall. The leaves are changing. There's a little bit of a chill in the air, and the sun's out. It's like this is my favorite weather right here.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. It's similar out here right now. The leaves have all turned. We've had a couple storms go through to blow the leaves away, and it was foggy and still this morning, and the mountain was peeking out. It's one of those times of year where it's crisp and good and not freezing cold yet. So we're doing okay. But in real time, our hearts are a little heavy this week. The Mariners lost.
I am so sorry.
Game 7, kind of tough circumstances. So anyway, that's what
There's
I'm.
There's a fog over the area.
There's a fog over the whole. And you know what was really neat, and we'll get into our topic. I'm super pumped about thinking about this today. But what was neat and what I appreciated for the last 6 weeks or so since the Mariners have been on a really awesome run, is that it's been this unifying thing amidst all the division. And the Northwest is a chaotic, crazy place in a lot of ways, and not everybody sees eye to eye, and there's a lot of division that happens, but this brought people together. And I think everybody, it just felt good to have some reprieve from kind of the divisive chaos for a while. Anyway, but that's over now, so we can get back to like getting at each other, I guess. I don't know. Not really. Hopefully not.
Well, we're first of all, welcome to all of our listeners. Thank you for listening. I hope that this is helping you in your life and ministry. And welcome to all of our new listeners with us, joining us. Thank you so much. Leave us a review or drop us a line, Jason or Jesse at reclaimleader.com. We love connecting with pastors, church people, listeners. I think there's a lot of really valuable and wonderful connection that happens through the podcast. It's actually been, I would say, the biggest surprise of doing this podcast has been the amount of relationships and connection it's created. It's been really cool. Yeah. But today I want to talk about something that it's just everywhere, and it's talking about Gen Z. We have talked a lot about Gen Z and ministry to Gen Z over the last couple of years, especially, and we've had episodes dedicated to it. And so you can go back, if you go to reclaimleader.com, you can see, you just kind of scroll and see all the Gen Z episodes. We've had, I think, a lot of really good ones. Mm-hmm. But it seems like it's always in flux. I keep seeing research, especially from Barna, mm-hmm. that almost appears to be contradictory to itself, and yet at the same time kind of makes sense. I'm mm-hmm. seeing things anecdotally here in the life of the church. I'm hearing stories from other pastors, and I think maybe it's a good time to just lift the hood, if you will, on what people are calling this Gen Z awakening of faith. Mm-hmm. Some people have used the word revival. The reason I don't love that word for Gen Z is because I feel like they never were really in the church to begin with. So maybe awakening, I sort of like that word better.
I think some people maybe use those words interchangeably, haven't drilled down on what revival is versus awakening or something.
Yeah.
Something good seems to be
something
happening.
Good. Yeah.
And there's an openness that seems to be coming, and a curiosity, and even a leaning in toward the church that we're starting to notice. It sounds like with some exceptions, and we've got to kind of think through the weeds a little bit on this stuff. But we're noticing something, and we're all trying to go, what does this mean? And before we hit record, you said, what does this mean for the church?
Yeah.
Sort of our observations and these anecdotal pieces of evidence, and then some stats and what does it mean for us as leaders in the church and for church in general? And so maybe as we go through this conversation, that's a good lens to have on, is just what does this mean for the church, and what is something that we maybe feel called to in our particular churches in light of all these things. So glad to be having this conversation, Jason.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that this isn't one of those episodes where Jason and Jesse are going to give you the best practices because we have it all figured out. This isn't one of those. This really is about how do we ask the right questions for our church to help reach the next generation. And so we've kind of distilled it into these things that we're noticing that are changing in real time. So Gen Z, definitely, by every metric that you can see or that's been researched or even with anecdotal evidence, is turning toward God in a big way.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no problem if you want to use revival language. I like the language of Asbury University regarding their 2023 movement, which many called a revival. They were a little reticent to call it that. They called it an outpouring. An outpouring of the Spirit, which I like as well. There's definitely an outpouring of the Spirit happening in Gen Z. I don't know if it's just the circles I'm in, but I'm seeing all of it firsthand. And I have more young adults in my orbit than I have in many, many years. And it's young adults who are searching for God and actually looking for, what do I do? How do I read my Bible? How do I do this life? How do I get involved in church? Why is this important? Why is that important? Is it okay if I do this for a career? Is it, I mean, just mentorship kind of discipleship questions. And I was having a conversation with Robbie, who's a fellow pastor and friend, and he's been on the podcast as well. And we were talking about this, and he's like, yeah, it's like there's this curiosity and searching that we're seeing from young adults and from teenagers. Remember, Gen Z dips all the way down into high school right now. And my son, who's a junior, he's never been more invested in the youth group, being here Sunday mornings, being here Wednesday nights, and usually junior years when students start to tap out. What's happening in our church right now is students are opting in, and we're seeing kids who haven't really been a part of things want to be here and be here. And, kids from the football team, it's been sort of wild, and a huge part of it's the community that they're finding. And they're all trying to figure out, how do we live this life of faith in this particular moment of our lives, which is exactly what you want to happen. There are a lot of factors going on. I could look around at what's going on here, and I could say that Fellowship of Christian Athletes has had a big role because a lot of athletes have really kind of gotten on fire for Jesus, and that has spread to youth groups and churches and friend groups. We even had something happen in our county that was unusual. This restaurant that's in nearby Long Branch, it's kind of like a gentrified restaurant. It's a super expensive steakhouse in this very kind of rundown area. And let's just say my previous experience with this restaurant wouldn't lead me to believe that their faith was going on. But something's going on there, because they started having Christian worship nights on their patio. And I was so surprised. I actually didn't believe it.
That's awesome.
And our worship leader, Dan, was asked to come and do music for one of those worship nights. I think they're trying to start a church there. I'm not really sure, but it's like, where did that come from? We've been hearing a lot about the religious behavior of this next generation. And part of it's like, how much of it is culture and how much of it's the generation? But it was the president of Asbury University, if you remember, who said that Gen Z is the course corrective to casual Christianity and the hope of the church.
Wow.
When we had Allison Stump here from InterVarsity at Monmouth University, they had all those baptisms a couple of months ago. So the question is, what do we make of all of this?
Yeah.
And what does it actually mean for us? I don't know. What are you seeing anything like this in the Northwest? Because I do know that each area of the country is a little bit different. So I don't know. What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I would say, I think for us, we're noticing similar patterns, maybe in a little bit different way, in the sense that there's an openness here in the Northwest, but it's not, and part of that openness is directed towards the church and exploring the Christian faith. There seems to be a general openness to spiritual things that then people are exploring different opportunities within that. So maybe it's something more like for us a spiritual awakening in which hopefully we're able to meet that moment with Jesus. And so as they're exploring some of the different possibilities and kind of quote religious options that are on the table. So for us, we're seeing an interest in Christianity and in the church in particular as part of a larger openness to a spiritual way of being in the world. And so I don't know exactly, that's probably based more on anecdotal experiences for me than stats, but that's kind of my sense, is that there's a spiritual openness and we're waiting to see if the church will be ready to meet that moment with the good news of Jesus.
Yeah.
Or if they'll find, out here in the Northwest, we've had some crazy cults and different kinds of things down through the decades where people find their spiritual openness or their need for something more foundational in their life pulls them towards some sort of spiritual or religious expression. And sometimes it's Jesus, sometimes it's not so healthy things. But this started, I think, maybe even a couple of decades ago with some of the stuff with Mars Hill, just young men in particular searching for a foundation to build their life on, and someone telling them, here's a vision for what it means to be a person of faith. Now, it didn't always end up being the healthiest thing. I think it started in a better place and got to some things that we saw in that podcast. But there's a desire for something to build your life on and some direction and someone to help you find that direction. So those are things we're noticing out here and wondering about. And I think, 20 years from now, I'm sure the sociologists will look back and pinpoint some of the reasons for all these things. But we're kind of feeling our way through right now is how do we help people navigate to some foundational things and particularly finding and rooting their identity in Christ and the foundation that he gives. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's,
it does.
That's what we're noticing.
It does. And a lot's been made of the kind of re-engagement of young men who oftentimes are searching for, there have been reports out, especially from the UK, that there's a desire for more traditional or even high church styles of worship for them.
Yep.
And even in our denomination, we're seeing young men groups who are really interested in going back and kind of running it back with some of the more traditional elements of church. And so what are we noticing? That's definitely something that's happening that can't be ignored. I think the question is this being overblown a little bit? Maybe. I think it's because it's so sweet to the Christian ear that especially if you are, if you love traditional worship, if that's kind of your love language, and you hear young men want tradition, and you're like, yes,
I knew it.
We were right all along,
Yeah.
I do think there's a natural kind of division of, just generational people wanting to. In fact, when I was talking to Robbie today, he said Jim Singleton had mentioned that in every generation, there's like 10% who want a more traditional experience of worship. Yeah. So who knows if this is a huge generational shift or if it's just,
well, and you said something really important there. We need to be mindful of our confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
I want to hear what I want to hear that confirms my hoped for outcome, which, so just being thoughtful, we might hear a stat that moves or appears to be moving in the direction of something we'd hope for. So we just got to keep an open mind about what these things might mean.
And Robbie has seen more Gen Z, especially young men, coming to traditional worship. I've also noticed that as well in our context, not a lot, but more. And so the first thing that I'll say that seems to be shifting is worship, at least a little bit. And what I mean is the fluidity of worship style, contemporary, traditional specifically. There was an article, again, that a lot of people sent me about the desire for Gen Z males to worship in these settings. And, I don't think we know if it's completely true, but we're seeing that there certainly are some right now. And style is definitely shifting. We're trying to figure out what that means in our context. There's a band that we have a relationship with, King's Kaleidoscope. For those who don't know who they are, they did the theme song to the Mars Hill podcast. And they are they have a really wild young following of like 20 somethings. So they came into town, they did a concert on a Saturday night here in Red Bank at the Vogel Theater. Then the next morning they led worship for us. It was a cool thing. Now at the Vogel on Saturday night, it was interesting. It was 90%, maybe more, 20 somethings.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the wild part is that a lot of their stuff and their whole album that's coming out next month is all hymns. It's all traditional hymns that they redo in their own way.
Sure. Yeah.
And these, I can't help but say kids because, they're 20 somethings, but they are belting out the hymn verses by heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to ignore that there is at least some kind of pull, and it was mostly young men, some kind of pull towards that for them, some sort of gravitational pull that I've not seen before in my years of ministry. I've not seen a passion for it on that level. And I don't know what that means. Is there a sacred music revival of more churches? There might be.
Mm-hmm.
Worship this past Sunday, I was telling you a bit about this. We had our worship leader, Kara, who is one of our amazing musicians. Her voice, honestly, Jesse, I can barely hold it together. I don't know what it is.
That's awesome.
When she leads worship, I'm kind of a mess.
Mm-hmm.
But her son was getting baptized, her baby, and she sang. We decided we're going to do "How Great Thou Art," the kind of Carrie Underwood epic version of that. We were going to close the service with that. And I got to tell you, there was almost not a dry eye in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And people of all ages. It's not something we normally do in contemporary. It was a palpable electricity doing that hymn with everybody in the room. And I got to tell you, it left us all thinking, okay, something seems to be shifting here, and let's pay attention to this. I don't think it means I don't think anybody walked away thinking, okay, we got to do a hymn a week. I don't think it was that. I think it was, where do we need to rethink or maybe make room for some more traditional elements, even in a contemporary setting? So I don't know what all this means. It just feels like there's something shifting.
Well, I think it's important for us to always evaluate the model, right? Contemporary worship is a model of ministry, not a mission of ministry. So it's like, so if something needs to shift in that and kind of meet the needs of a new generation coming up in the church, or needs is maybe not quite the right way, but helps connect their heart to God's heart in a way that leads to greater discipleship and impact in our communities, then we ought to be willing to ask that question and explore it, right? So for us, one of the things that we're doing this fall is we've been thinking about and praying about for quite a while about introducing a worship and prayer night that's really just worship and bringing a variety of different kind of types of worship in our contemporary setting, but expressing it in, with some more traditional hymns in that way, that contemporized hymns, and then having time for just prayer and scripture reflection, not really a sermon time. And people are more excited about that than any of my last 30 sermon series. I'm like, I don't know, that's probably not quite fair, but there's really some excitement around creating a space for people to come together to worship and pray for our world, pray for our needs, pray for healing. I'm like, what is going on? Are we going back to some charismatic expression of the Presbyterian Church from like the 80s and 90s? I don't know. So trying to be attentive to what the Spirit is doing and being willing to move in that direction and at least ask the questions and consider it. What does this mean for us and for how we gather and how we worship?
Well, I think too, and maybe some of our listeners who are more adept than I am at church history, you sort of look at the ebb and flow over the last couple hundred years of we get really focused on theology, and the church kind of gets into a stale place, and then we need an awakening or a revival, the Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening. It was always in response to this, no, we got to figure this out theologically, which was important. Right. But then it sort of in some way kind of sucked the heart out of it, and we needed that re-engagement with the relationship with Jesus. And it feels like, to me, I don't know what the history books are going to say about this time, but it feels like there is another awakening that's happening in response to all these theological arguments that we've had over the last,
The Holy Spirit saying, watch this instead.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So,
Yeah.
okay. So worship is something we're noticing that may be changing. I don't know how, I don't know if a lot, but it's something to pay attention to when it comes to Gen Z. Okay.
Yeah.
Second thing is the engagement. There's good news and there's bad news. So on the one hand, as Barna, and almost all of my research here today is all from Barna. So I want to encourage you, if you have not subscribed to them, that's such a great resource. They don't pay me to say that. I really find it helpful as I look at trends happening. But they had said that, and this is a quote, for the first time in decades, younger adults are outpacing older generations in church attendance. Millennials now average 1.8 weekends a month, and Gen Z hits 1.9. Those rates are up almost one extra weekend a month, nearly double the rates of just 5 years ago.
That's incredible. Yeah. Double.
I never would have thought.
Yeah.
The millennials, Jesse.
Come on. There's redemption for all of us, Jason, is what they're kind of,
I thought they were the nuns, and here we go.
They are. I mean, the other part of the conversation is there's still a lot that aren't coming, and there is rising.
For sure.
But we should celebrate what is happening, what is good, and I would say again, anecdotally, we are seeing more consistent attendance from the people who are part of the life of the church and would consider themselves committed, and so they're engaged, and they're engaging more frequently. And I was even talking to a dad that was like, we've had to make some hard decisions about our kids' sports. And I was like, oh, here we go. Here's the conversation.
Yeah.
And so he said, and so we decided not to do that team because we were committed to coming on Sunday mornings. And that's like, wait, what? Because how many times have we had the opposite conversation, right? You probably won't be seeing us for a couple months because we have soccer on Sunday mornings. Well, this was the opposite of that. So, and again, millennial family and raising young kids and leaning in.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, Barna's latest research, I just read this last week, reveals a surprising shift. Again, this is a quote. Gen Z women, once quite active in their faith, are now the most likely to disengage from church, prayer, and belief. In fact, research found that 2 in 5 young women identify as having no faith. The way this breaks down, according to the article, is 38% of Gen Z women ages 18 to 24 now identify as religiously unaffiliated, a notable statistic that sits higher than their male peers. Currently, young adult women report the lowest rates of Bible reading, prayer, and church attendance among their peers. Barna's research suggests that intergenerational connection may be the key to restoring faith and belonging among Gen Z women. First of all, when you hear that about Gen Z women, are you surprised by that? I am a bit, because in our context, women are still more engaged than men, even in Gen Z.
Yeah, I do think that probably runs a little bit counter to our actual experience, like on maybe Sunday morning attendance or some of the young adults that are at Marine View. Yeah, so I think we would have to unpack that a little more. I mean, outside of the walls of the church, if that's going on, what does that mean? I would say the young women who are still in the life of the church, the mentoring piece does resonate. I see intergenerational relationships and welcome there. And so maybe that's why they're still here. And we're out in the suburbs where we have lots of young families and people who have had their whole lives here. So a lot of the young adults that are here are maybe still living at home or looking to get a career launch and haven't quite gotten there yet. And they really need that kind of connection and community. So yeah, I think it's something we're kind of thinking about the implications of. And when you shared that stat, I thought, what happened?
Yeah.
Right? That was I didn't have a conclusion. I just was wondering what happened.
Yeah. And I don't think any of us know, but I don't know if it's related to the fact that more young men are gravitating toward the church. I have noticed that the young men who are gravitating toward church there seems to be a much more black and white view of what things ought to be.
Yep.
and maybe that is a pendulum swing from the, well, you're okay, I'm okay, and everything's okay.
No, I think for young men, the search for certainty, the search
Yeah.
for foundational things that's very evident.
Yeah.
And so what on the other side are some of the factors that led to this exodus of young women, and what are the antidotes to that, or how do we re-engage? And so we could make some guesses about what happened in the last decade in our culture that maybe has led to some of this, but it's hard to pinpoint. And it's later on we might have some better answers, but right now we can observe it and go, oh, this is information we need to know, and then pray about what does this mean for us. So
like it's just something we're noticing. And Barna says this, which I think is really good, says, beneath the statistics lies a deeper issue: disconnection. Gen Z women aren't just stepping away from church, they're also reporting a lack of meaningful support from the adults in their lives. And that's something that the church is like perfectly set up to address, because we're sort of the only intergenerational game in town. I mean, I can't think of another place where theoretically all living generations could be under the same roof on any given Sunday.
Right.
And in fact, Barna, it's behind a paywall, but they have a course. Actually, I take that back. I don't know if it's a paywall or you just have to register for the course for free. I'm not sure. But I'd encourage everyone to check it out. I'm going to check it out. It's called a Simple Mentoring Course for Gen Z. It's barna.com/ it's in partnership with 10 by 10, which is an organization that helps with mentoring and outreach and discipleship. So barna.com/ spell out 10, TEN -X -10. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. But maybe that is part of the solution. Maybe it's because there is no intergenerational connection. I do have to say a lot of those young adults are seeking mentorship. They want somebody to help them understand how to apply their faith in their life, which should be music to our ears, and we should be perfectly set up to address it. And sadly, we're clearly not. So again, what's got me thinking is, well, what are we going to do about it? How can we start setting this up?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 3.
Yep.
The other thing that we're kind of noticing is the trend toward more acceptance to talk about faith in our broader culture.
Yeah.
There's been a ton of musical crossover with Jesus music and secular music. You got Jelly Roll. I mean, has become a huge Christian influencer. And I don't know that anybody saw that coming.
Yeah.
Brandon Lake's music. A big musical push of artists collaborating on faith-based, not just secular music. It's been really wild to see. I'm a little bit surprised at how fast it feels like it's happened. But what happens is record companies realize, hey, we can make a ton of money. This seems like a good thing.
Yeah.
But the people are kind of demanding it, or they're showing that there is a hunger for it, which I think is awesome. I also think it's maybe a little confusing. I think about athletes and post-game interviews. And I think this has a big impact on Gen Z. The athletes they look up to God.
Yeah.
I mean, college, pros. I can never remember a time when it was like this. Remember with Tim Tebow and all the flack he got for talking about his faith like 15 years ago?
Yeah, I remember.
The culture's completely shifted. That is the norm. High school kids getting up, I just want to thank Jesus Christ. And I just want to, it's part of the culture. You notice that shift when Damar Hamlin got hurt in 2023.
Yeah.
And even all the media personalities and everything to pray for Damar. I mean, people who I never thought would utter those words were like, let's all pray for Damar. The culture has shifted.
Yeah.
And it seems to reflect a desire for God, at least on some level.
Yeah. Whether they've been able to articulate what version of that, but there is, I think, a hunger for something beyond us, something greater, someone that can hold us amidst the realities of a broken world. And yeah, I think, again, observationally, what does this mean? Is this a trend that's going to be here today and gone tomorrow? Or is this part of that greater sense of openness or an awakening that maybe is happening, that the church needs to be prepared to meet that moment. And so that's one of the conversations we were having as a leadership team. Are we ready for people that are asking big questions about life and faith and who Jesus is and what he might mean for their lives? Are we ready for that? Or when they show up, we'll be like, uh-oh, what do we do now? So just, being prepared for that opportunity, I think, is important.
I think the other thing to recognize in culture is that, I mean, listen, I have no desire to get political on this because I know what a hot button issue it is, but you can't ignore the fact that the Charlie Kirk assassination hit Gen Z hard, particularly young men, and which is fascinating to me. Teenagers were seeing, not even on purpose. I mean, my son was one of them. He said he was scrolling something. All of a sudden the video came up of him being shot, like a close-up video. And we had to talk to him about it. He was rattled. What's interesting, it seems like, again, especially young men, even if they didn't agree with Charlie and all the things that he said, there seemed to be this attraction to a very blunt style of debate. I'm not totally sure what that's about. I think it's just somebody who's got conviction, who wants to argue their point of view. But in the wake of his assassination, there were 18,000 new chapters started at high schools and colleges of Turning Point USA. I mean, that you can't ignore that. I mean, I know some people that cheer that and other people that jeer that, or somewhere in between, but you can't ignore that generationally, there's something about that. There was something about him that struck a chord generationally. And I don't know what that means. I'm just observing it. And maybe it sort of goes back to this idea of young men really wanting that clarity and that conviction or that boldness to live their life in a meaningful way, and to be clear about what they say they believe. I think there's something really that's incredibly attractive for young men because it's just not what the world's telling them. And there seems to be this desire, so I don't know what we do with that, but it's something that we're noticing.
Yeah, paying attention to the cultural, from a pop culture and athletics. I mean, those are two massive elements of our society, right?
Yeah.
And we're hearing these themes, spiritual themes, and especially kind of talking about God, even talking about Jesus or singing about, Christ. Like, those are things that are showing up in our culture, and we should go, what's that about? So again, observations that can help us think about what is this? How do we engage?
Yeah. And the last two observations are quick. Number 4 is there is just clearly a continued trend toward openness to Jesus. We sort of opened with that, but our young adult ministry went from 0 to 15 on a regular basis in Bible study. And they were even given an option, do you want to do a video curriculum, or do you just want to read the Bible? So we just want to read the Bible. Yeah. They've started coming to worship. And what's interesting is almost all of them came to the Bible study first and then worship. They didn't go to worship first. Yeah. Which says something. But there's this and what we hear from our young adult leaders are that it's just a huge, huge curiosity. Who's Jesus and what does this mean for my life? I mean, huge. Yeah. Yeah. And even to be able to say, if you're interested in learning more about who Jesus is and what Jesus might mean for your life, that's a great way, I think. And we're still learning ourselves about how to talk about this, but I think that's a really good way to talk about exploring Christian faith with this youngest generation coming up. Yeah. And then lastly, number 5 is it seems like this generation, again, I mentioned this before, but really has a desire to be mentored. My fraternity chapter reached out to me in the last week, and, it was like a form email that went to, I'm sure, all the alumni, but they were asking, would any of you be interested in a mentoring program with current fraternity brothers, that there's this desire to learn from the generations that went before them how to do this. I mean, you can think about the world that these college grads are going out into, and the job market as it is. And oh my goodness, all the challenges that are going with, we used to think of the American dream, and then, you can do all these things. And I don't know that any of them think that anymore because of the reality of their world. But there's just a desire to be shaped and to be mentored. And what do we do with that? Here's my 2 cents on all of this. This is my opinion of what I think is going on. I think this is a moment that we don't want to miss, because I don't know how long this openness is going to last. And we don't know what other triggering cultural event is going to happen. And I think there's too much at stake to just passively be like, well, we'll see. I think let's try to engage with what we're seeing right now, because I really do believe that there's opportunity here we can't guarantee is always going to be there. This hunger, this openness. And so if you're a church that's been sitting on the fence with the next generation, or maybe you haven't had kids in your church in a long time, or maybe not that many, or 0 young adults or whatever, I think it's time to find out, how do we change that? Even if that means we're going to give financial resources to the local college ministry that has nothing to do with our church.
Right.
We're going to donate to InterVarsity, or we're going to donate to FCA, or donate to some other organization that has the contact. I think now's the time. And then to ask questions on, if you had 2 or 3 young people in your church, and most of you do, like young adults, how can we connect with them and ask them what they need, and how can we help them, and how can we create relationships with people who've been walking with Jesus their whole lives? I think now's the time. And I know it's not easy, because we all want a plug and play program.
Right.
Jason, just tell us what the program name is, and we'll order it on Amazon and we'll be good to go. That's just not how it works. It's going to take some legwork, and it's going to take some elbow grease and some figuring it out. But I promise you, it's worth that. It's worth whatever work it's going to take.
Yeah. And I think part of it is doing an evaluation of who are we as a congregation? What strengths do we have that can be applied to this upcoming generation in a way that helps them in a servant posture? And I think about all of our churches with all these senior adults who have so much life experience and wisdom. And instead of saying, how do we just, help them in the final season of life? How do we mobilize them for ministry with these young adults, if that's what they're hungry for? So I think there's an opportunity for vision here with our existing congregations, kind of getting into the culture of our church and working through the whole system of the church and saying, how do we reorient our way of thinking to take the focus off of us and put it on these next generations and serve them in whatever ways God has equipped us to serve them. And who knows what will come out of that. And every church's answer to that question is probably going to be unique to your situation and your setting and all those things. But I think that would be a really healthy posture. How do we take what we have, the gifts God has given us, and use them to serve this next generation?
Yeah. So, and to remember, not everything just has to be a program. Like some of the best things just may be, hey, who's interested in having dinner next month? Can we put a few multi-generational groups together to have dinner together? And some of that relationship stuff and mentoring can happen organically. Yeah.
Thinking about, there's a million ideas, right? And that's the best part. I think this is where you and I start to geek out at 38 minutes into our podcast. We gotta be a little careful. But I was talking to one church. They're near a community college, and it's a commuter campus. But they were talking about, how do we do some sort of care package kinds of things for college students, and some that are on campus, and give them a taste of home. And so they've been trying to figure out how to serve the college students that are there nearby without an agenda to get them to come to the church necessarily. But they're noticing that the effect of serving that next generation is that they're starting to build relationships and seeing some of them come to be a part of their congregation. So that is a good thing, but they're doing it first because these are young people in their community who need to be served. And so having that mindset, I think, who knows? I can't wait to hear the ideas that come up, and then we'll borrow them and apply them in our setting.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, and again, just to kind of close and to land the plane, when a baby's born, baby needs a lot of help to survive and thrive. And we have a whole bunch of spiritual babies being born in this next generation, and they need a lot of help right now to survive and thrive. And how can we be there to help nurture them through it? I think is one of the most important questions we could be asking as churches.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff, Jason. Well, I appreciate bringing this topic, and I'm sure we'll be back to it soon again, because this is really important and relevant for all of our churches to think about how are we faithful, not only with those who are here, but the generations that are coming up, and serving them well, and passing that baton of faith and meeting the moment of this spiritual openness that seems to be happening. So, thanks for bringing the topic, and look forward to picking it up again soon.
All right, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for listening. If you find this helpful for you and your ministry, we encourage you, please share it with a colleague and get the word out. And until next time, we say it every time, ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. Take care, everyone.